The great halls of the alien palace were silent. Stone pillars carved with ancient symbols reached high into the shadows, and torch-like lights flickered along the walls, casting long shapes across the marble floor. In that silence, the alien king sat on his throne, his eyes heavy with sorrow. Around him, the noble council waited for him to speak, but he had no words left. His daughter, the only heir to the throne, was fading away. The princess had been weak since birth. Her skin, pale as starlight, carried the marks of illness. She could not breathe deeply without coughing, nor could she walk far without trembling. The healers of the empire had tried everything: herbal medicines, rare crystals, even ancient rituals whispered about in the old texts. Nothing worked. Her body continued to fail, and the king, despite all his power, was helpless. That morning, he had walked into her chamber. She lay on the soft bed, her breath shallow, her silver hair spread across the pillows like strands of moonlight. Her eyes opened weakly when she saw him. "Father," she whispered. Her voice was thin, almost like a breeze that could be lost at any moment. The king held her hand in his, and for the first time in many years, his hands shook. "Do not waste your strength speaking," he told her. "Save your breath." She smiled faintly. "It does not matter, Father. My breath is always leaving me." His chest tightened. He was the ruler of worlds, the commander of fleets, and the voice of law for millions of his kind. Yet here, before his only child, he felt powerless. That was when the old prophecy came back to him, words he had ignored, words that had sounded foolish. It was said that when the royal bloodline began to fade, hope would come not from their kind, but from the species they once called fragile, the humans. At first he had dismissed the idea. Humans were small, short-lived, and unremarkable compared to the strength of his people. But as he looked into his daughter's dimming eyes, he felt the weight of his choice. Pride could not heal her. Tradition could not save her. Something else had to be tried. So that evening he summoned a human. The palace guards opened the great doors and a man walked in. His steps echoed against the stone floor. He wore simple clothes, a jacket that had seen better days, and boots covered in dust. His dark hair was uncombed, his face tired but strong. He bowed once, not too low, not too casual, and stood before the throne. This man was not a warrior of legend. He was not a decorated officer. He was a human engineer, once a soldier who had seen battles and scars but chosen a quieter life afterward. Yet he had earned respect in the empire through his persistence. Where others gave up, he always finished his work. Where others grew tired, he endured. The alien king looked at him carefully. "You know why you are here." The human nodded. "I have heard whispers, but I want to hear it from you." "My daughter is dying," the king said simply. His voice echoed in the hall. "No healer of my kind has cured her. No remedy has worked. They say your people carry resilience unknown to us, that humans fight even when there is nothing left to fight with. I ask you to take her, teach her, guide her. If she must die, let her die trying. If she can live, then bring her back to me stronger." The council gasped. Some nobles shouted in protest. One stepped forward. "My king, this is madness. To entrust the blood of our people to an outsider? To a human?" But the king raised his hand, silencing them. His gaze never left the man before him. "Do you accept?" The human hesitated. He looked at the princess, who had been brought into the hall in a hovering chair. She looked fragile, like glass ready to break. But her eyes met his for a moment, and in them he saw not weakness, but a quiet plea. "Save me if you can." He nodded, slowly. "I will take her. I don't promise miracles, but I promise I will not give up." The king rose from his throne. For a moment, the ruler of the empire looked smaller, just a father desperate for hope. "That is all I ask." That night, the human prepared for the journey. He was given little, some rations, water, and a small weapon for defense. He did not want royal luxuries. If the princess was to grow stronger, she could not live in silk sheets or eat meals prepared by servants. She needed to feel the ground beneath her feet, the sun on her skin, and the air in her lungs. The princess, however, was unsure. As the human helped her into the small transport ship, she asked quietly, "Why you? Why not another of my kind?" He looked at her with a faint smile. "Because sometimes the strongest people don't look strong at all. Humans don't survive because we're the biggest or the fastest. We survive because we keep going, even when everything tells us to stop. That's what I'm going to show you." The ship lifted off the palace platform, leaving behind the lights of the royal city. For the first time in her life, the princess was leaving the comfort of her golden cage. She looked out the window as the towers of her home shrank into the distance. Her hands trembled, not just from weakness but from fear of the unknown. The human noticed. He did not comfort her with soft lies. Instead, he said, "Fear is good. Fear means you're alive, but we'll use it to keep moving forward." The journey took them to the outer lands, a place where no noble would live. The air was harsher, the land dry and cracked, the nights colder. It was not deadly, but it demanded effort. The human chose it for that reason. If she was to grow strong, she would have to learn in a place where her strength mattered. The first day was hard. She tried to walk a short distance, but her legs gave out. She fell to the ground, gasping for air. The human did not rush to carry her. Instead, he crouched beside her. "You can stop," he said, "or you can try again. Every step you take is a victory." She looked at him, frustrated. "You don't understand. I can't do this." He met her gaze firmly. "You're right. You can't yet. But you will. Because I'll make sure of it." And so it began. That night, under the stars, the princess lay awake, her body aching in ways it never had before. But for the first time in years, she felt something new. Not just pain, not just weakness. She felt the faint spark of change. In the palace far away, the alien king stood by the window of his chamber, staring at the sky. His council whispered of betrayal, of madness, of shame. But he did not listen. His heart told him he had made the right choice. He whispered into the night, "Bring her back to me, human. Bring her back strong." And in the distance, on the rough land beneath alien stars, the human and the princess took their first steps together. Steps that would shape the legacy of two worlds. The mornings in the outer lands were always cold. Thin mist floated across the barren ground and the cracked earth glistened with dew. The princess woke to the strange sound of birds calling out in sharp voices, their wings cutting through the early sky. She was not used to waking outside her golden room. Her body ached from the rough ground where she had slept, and her thin blanket did little to keep her warm. The human was already awake. She found him sitting by a small fire, boiling water in a dented metal pot. His jacket was thrown aside, his shirt damp with sweat from exercises he had already finished. She frowned, pulling herself up. "You rise so early?" she asked, her voice tired. He smiled faintly. "The day doesn't wait for us. If we want to grow stronger, we can't waste it." Her stomach turned as she looked at the pot. "What is that smell?" "Breakfast," he replied simply, pouring the hot water over dry grains. "It's not palace food, but it will keep you alive." She forced herself to eat, though each bite felt tasteless compared to the feasts she once had. Yet when she saw the human eat the same with no complaint, she bit down the words she wanted to say. After breakfast, he stood and handed her a walking stick. "Today we walk further than yesterday." Her eyes widened. Yesterday she had barely walked 100 steps before collapsing. "I can't." "Yes, you can. You just don't know it yet," he said firmly. She followed him into the dry land. The ground was uneven, the sun beginning to rise and heat the air. After only a short distance, her legs trembled. Sweat dripped down her forehead, her breathing heavy. She stumbled and fell. The human stopped, crouched near her, but did not help her up. What do you want to do, stay down? Or rise again? She looked at him in frustration. You're cruel, you could carry me. I could, he agreed calmly. But then you would stay weak, and I promised your father to bring you back strong. She clenched her fists. Anger burned in her chest, but beneath it was something else. Pride. She hated feeling weak, hated the thought of nobles whispering that she was useless. She pushed herself up, her arms shaking, and took one more step. The human gave a small nod. That's it, one step at a time. You don't win strength in one day, you earn it. They continued. She fell again, and again she rose. By the time the sun reached its height, her body was soaked in sweat, her throat dry and her feet sore. But she had walked farther than yesterday, farther than she thought possible. That night, as she lay under the stars, she whispered to herself, I did not fail today. For the first time, she felt a spark of pride in herself. The days turned into weeks. Each morning, the human trained her. Sometimes they walked. Sometimes they carried heavy stones across the field. Sometimes he made her run short distances, though she collapsed in the dust many times. Other days, he taught her how to climb rough hills with her hands and feet. The princess complained often, but she never stopped. Her skin grew tougher under the sun, her breathing deeper, her legs steadier. The fragile girl who once could not stand for long was slowly changing. At night by the fire, the human told her stories of his people. He spoke of human explorers who crossed oceans without knowing if land waited on the other side. He spoke of soldiers who fought even when they were outnumbered, of mothers who carried their children through storms, of builders who raised cities from stone and steel. Humans are not the strongest, he said one night as the fire cracked. We are not the fastest, not the tallest, not the longest living, but we endure. We bend, but we don't break. That is our legacy. The princess listened quietly, her silver eyes glowing faintly in the firelight. Your people sound impossible. He chuckled. We are just stubborn. Sometimes that's all it takes. She thought of her life before. Soft sheets, servants ready to carry her, nobles whispering about her weakness. None of those things had made her feel alive. But here, sweating under the sun and aching under the stars, she felt something growing inside her. A new fire, faint but real. One afternoon, a storm rolled across the land. Dark clouds swallowed the sky, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. The wind tore at their small shelter, and lightning flashed above the hills. The princess shivered, her blanket soaked through. This is madness, she cried over the roar of the storm. We will be destroyed out here. The human only tightened the ropes holding their shelter. Storms pass. You just have to hold on. She wrapped her arms around herself, fear twisting her chest. But as the night dragged on, she realized something. She was still alive. The wind screamed, the rain lashed, but her heart beat steady. When dawn came and the storm was gone, she stood outside looking at the clear sky with wide eyes. I survived, she whispered, almost in disbelief. The human smiled at her. Yes, and now you know you can survive more than you thought. By the end of the month, the change in her was visible. Her cheeks no longer looked hollow. Her arms carried small signs of muscle. She walked with steady steps and could climb the rocky hill near their camp without falling. One evening, she reached the top of that hill alone. The sun was setting, painting the horizon in shades of gold and red. She spread her arms wide, letting the wind rush against her. For the first time in her life, she felt free. Not a fragile daughter hidden behind palace walls, but a person strong enough to stand tall against the world. The human joined her, carrying 2 canteens of water. How do you feel? He asked. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, alive. For a long moment they stood together looking at the horizon. She felt something stir in her heart, something she could not name yet. But she knew one thing. She no longer wanted to return as the weak child everyone pitied. She wanted to return as someone who could lead, who could prove that even the impossible was possible. But far away in the palace, the nobles whispered. They believed the princess was gone forever. They told each other that the human had failed, that she must be dead in the wilderness. Some plotted to use her death as a reason to challenge the king. The alien king heard their voices but did not answer. He stood each night at the balcony of his chamber, looking into the stars, whispering the same words again and again. Bring her back strong. And in the outer lands, under the same stars, his daughter was learning the meaning of strength, one step, one breath, one struggle at a time. The palace of the alien king no longer carried the peace it once did. The council chamber, usually filled with calm discussion, now echoed with whispers of unrest. The nobles sat in groups, their long robes sweeping the floor, their jeweled hands waving with irritation. The subject was always the same: the missing princess and the human who had taken her away. It has been too long, one noble said, his voice sharp. The girl is weak. She could not have lasted in the outer lands. The human has failed, and the king hides it from us. Another shook his head. The king is blinded by grief. He trusts legends, foolish words about human resilience, but legends do not heal sickness. Others murmured in agreement. Some even leaned closer to whisper of rebellion. They saw the king's decision not as a father's desperation, but as weakness unfit for a ruler. The alien king sat at the head of the chamber, his crown gleaming, his face carved with weariness. He listened but did not answer. His heart told him the truth. The human would not give up. His daughter would not surrender. But the voices of doubt grew louder each day. Far away, in the rough lands of dust and stone, the princess trained under the human's watchful eye. Weeks had turned into months, and her body was no longer the same. The fragile girl who once fell after a few steps now climbed rocky slopes with steady breath. Her arms carried strength, her voice had power, and her silver eyes shone with determination. One afternoon, after a long climb, she sat on the edge of a cliff, looking down at the valley below. The human handed her a flask of water. You've come far, he said quietly. She drank and wiped her mouth. And yet I still feel like there is more. My body grows stronger, yes, but inside, something else is changing. He sat beside her. Strength is not just in the body, it's in the mind. You've learned to keep moving even when it hurts, even when you're afraid. That is what makes you stronger than before. She looked at him with thought in her eyes. Back at the palace, I was a shadow. They whispered about me. They pitied me. But now, when I see my reflection in the water, I see someone different, someone who can stand. The human nodded. And one day you'll have to return. When you do, they won't recognize you. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Return, yes, but I fear what waits there. The nobles will not welcome me. They will not want to see me rise. They want me gone. The human looked at her firmly. That's why you must go back. Not to prove them right, but to show them what they never believed possible. She lowered her gaze to the valley. A quiet fire burned in her chest. For the first time she wanted to face them, not as the weak princess but as someone reborn. In the palace the conspiracies deepened. The nobles held secret meetings in dim halls, whispering beneath the banners of old kings. The people grow restless, one said. They ask about the princess. They ask why she is hidden. If we say she has died, they will accept it, and then the throne will be open to us. Another noble leaned forward, his voice low. The king has no strength left. He clings to his human gamble. If we strike now, we can remove him and claim power. They planned a declaration, one that would be announced before the empire. The princess is dead, the king has lost his mind, and a new ruler must rise. But they had not seen the change that was taking place far from the palace. One evening in the outer lands, the human set a small fire and handed the princess a piece of rough bread. She took it, her hands no longer shaking from weakness. You're ready, he said simply. She frowned. Ready for what? To go back. Her breath caught. She looked into the fire, the flames dancing in her eyes. If I return, they will mock me. They will say I was carried. They will not believe. Then make them believe, the human said firmly. Walk into that hall with the strength you've earned. Show them what you've become. They can't take that away from you. Her heart pounded. The thought of facing the nobles terrified her. But the fear no longer froze her. It moved her. She clenched her fists. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will return, not as the weak child they remember, but as something stronger. I will show them the truth." Days later, their journey back to the palace began. The path was long, and as they neared the city, her chest tightened. She remembered the whispers, the pitiful looks, the nobles turning away from her, but beside her walked the human, steady as ever, his steps calm. At night, as they camped closer to the city walls, she sat awake, her eyes on the stars. "Do you think my father will recognize me?" she asked softly. The human chuckled. "He'll see you before anyone else does. A father always knows." She smiled faintly, her heart warming at the thought. In the palace, the nobles gathered for the great declaration. The hall was filled with banners, torches, and the echo of voices. The people of the city crowded outside, waiting for the news. The king sat on his throne, his face unreadable, as the nobles stepped forward. One noble raised his voice. "People of the empire, the time has come to speak the truth. The princess is gone. She is no more. The king has led us into shame, trusting a human over his own people. We must—" The great doors of the hall burst open, all eyes turned. The princess stepped inside. She was no longer the pale girl who could barely stand. Her steps were strong, her posture straight, her silver hair shining under the torchlight. She wore simple clothes from the outer lands, not the silks of royalty. Dust clung to her boots, but her eyes blazed with life. Gasps filled the chamber. Nobles froze, their mouths open in shock. The human walked behind her, silent, his presence steady. The princess stopped in the center of the hall. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice clear and strong. "I am alive, and I have returned, not as the weak child you pitied, but as the heir who will stand." The hall fell silent. Even the torches seemed to quiet their flames. The alien king's eyes filled with tears. His heart, heavy for so long, felt light for the first time in years. He rose slowly, his voice breaking. "My daughter." The nobles trembled. Their plans of rebellion shattered in a single moment. The girl they had counted as dead stood before them, stronger than ever. And in that moment, the empire felt the weight of change. The silence inside the royal hall was heavy. No one dared to breathe too loudly as the princess stood before them, her figure outlined by the firelight of the great torches. For years, the nobles had whispered that she was frail, cursed, and unfit to rule. For months they had told themselves she was already gone, but now she stood alive, steady and strong. The alien king gripped the arms of his throne, his heart racing. He had dreamed of this moment, but even in his dreams, she had never looked so full of life. Her steps were firm, her shoulders straight, her voice clear. His daughter, the one he feared to lose, had returned not as a shadow but as a flame. One of the nobles stammered, his jeweled fingers twitching nervously. This is not possible. It must be a trick." The princess's silver eyes cut through him like a blade. "Do you call me a ghost, noble? Do you say I am an illusion while I stand before you, breathing and alive?" Murmurs rose through the chamber. The nobles who had plotted against the king looked at one another, their plans turning to dust. The people outside the hall shouted in excitement, for word of the princess's return spread like wildfire. The human remained at the back, silent. He had no need for words here. His work was not to take the spotlight but to let her shine. He watched her stand tall, and for the first time since he met her, he saw her not as someone struggling to survive but as someone who commanded respect. The alien king finally rose from his throne. His voice shook with emotion. "My daughter, you have returned. Show them what you have become." The princess turned to the nobles, her voice strong enough to echo across the stone walls. "You doubted me. You pitied me. You called me unworthy. But look at me now. I am no longer the fragile child you whispered about. I have walked the barren lands, endured storms, and risen every time I fell. I have learned from a human what none of you could teach me, The will to fight, the will to endure, the will to live. Gasps rippled through the crowd at her bold words. Some nobles lowered their heads in shame. Others clenched their fists, angry at being defied, but none could deny the truth standing before them. One noble sneered, trying to hold his ground. Strength? You speak of strength, but words are easy. You have no proof. You are still the weakling who left this palace. The princess did not hesitate. She stepped forward, pulled the heavy ceremonial spear from its holder near the throne, and held it firmly in her hands. Once, she would not have been able to lift it. Now her arms held it steady, her stance solid. She spun at once, the sound sharp as it cut the air. "Is this weakness?" she asked coldly. The hall was silent. Even the noble who had mocked her shrank back. The human's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. She had found her strength, not because of weapons, but because she believed in herself. The alien king's voice rose with pride. "Let it be known. My daughter has returned stronger than ever, and it was the resilience of a human that guided her. From this day forward, the bond between our people and theirs will not be broken." The people outside roared with approval. Cheers echoed through the city streets. For too long they had mourned her in silence, believing her gone. Now she stood before them as hope reborn, but the nobles who had plotted rebellion did not give up so easily. That night, in hidden chambers, they whispered again. "She has returned, yes, but she has shamed us all by praising a human." One hissed, "If she takes the throne, everything we know will change. We cannot allow it." Another nodded grimly. "We must test her. If she truly believes she is strong, let her prove it in the old ways." And so, the next day, when the council gathered, one of the nobles stepped forward. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with challenge. "Princess, if you claim strength, then show it. Face the trial of endurance, the same trial our ancestors faced when they proved their right to lead. If you succeed, none will question you again. If you fail, then your words mean nothing." The chamber buzzed with excitement. The trial was ancient, a harsh test of will and stamina designed for warriors, not for one who had once been frail. The king frowned, anger flashing in his eyes. "You would demand this of my daughter?" But the princess raised her hand gently. "No, father, let them speak. If this is the way to silence doubt, then I accept." The human's eyes met hers across the chamber. She saw no fear in his gaze, only trust. He had trained her for this moment without knowing it. The trial was set for the following day. The people gathered in the great arena, a wide circle of stone where countless warriors had once been tested. The nobles filled the high seats, eager to see her fail, but the common people filled the lower stands, cheering loudly, their hope shining through. The human stood near the edge, his arms crossed. He knew what was coming. Endurance was not about muscle or size, it was about heart, and she had more of that now than any noble in the chamber. The trial began. First came the climb. She was made to scale the steep wall of stone with no rope, only her hands and feet. Once she would have collapsed within moments. Now, though her muscles strained and her palms bled against the rough surface, she climbed steadily, pulling herself higher until she reached the top. The crowd gasped in awe. Next came the run across the scorching sands. The heat pressed against her skin. The ground burned her feet, but she did not slow. Her breathing was heavy, but she remembered the human's words. One step at a time. She pushed forward until she reached the end, collapsing to her knees for only a moment before rising again. Finally came the trial of weight, carrying the great stone across the arena floor. The nobles leaned forward, waiting for her to fail. The stone was massive, carved from the heart of the mountain. She bent down, wrapped her arms around it, and lifted. Her body shook, her legs quivered, but she did not drop it. Step by step, she carried it across the arena. The crowd roared louder with every step. "Stronger than ever, stronger than ever," they chanted. At last, she placed the stone down on the far side, her chest heaving, her arms trembling. Sweat poured down her face, but her eyes shone with fire. She had done it. The nobles could no longer speak. Their challenge had turned into their defeat. The alien king stood in the royal balcony, his voice breaking as he declared, "My daughter has proven herself. She is the heir of this empire, and no one shall doubt her again." The people erupted in cheers, their voices shaking the arena. The princess raised her head high, her heart pounding with triumph. The human smiled quietly from the shadows. He knew she had passed not because of her body alone, but because of the will she had built in the wilderness. The lesson of humanity had become her strength. That evening, the palace was filled with celebration. Music echoed through the halls and banners were raised in her honor. But in a quiet moment away from the noise, the princess sat with the human on a balcony overlooking the city lights. She whispered, her voice soft but strong, "I could not have done this without you." He shook his head. "You could. I only showed you the path. You walked it." Her eyes glistened, but she did not argue. For deep inside, she knew the truth. He had given her the gift of resilience, the strength no healer could provide. And though the night was filled with joy, both of them knew one thing clearly. This was only the beginning of her legacy. The palace was alive with music, the sound of drums echoing through the halls, voices raised in song and banners flowing in the night air. From the tallest towers to the quietest streets, the people celebrated their princess. The nobles had been silenced, their doubt crushed by her triumph in the arena. The empire had seen with its own eyes that she was not weak, not broken, but stronger than anyone had believed possible. In the throne room, the alien king sat with pride shining in his eyes. His daughter stood beside him, not in silk robes, but in the simple garments she had worn through her trials. The crowd of citizens bowed before her, not with pity, but with respect. She lifted her chin and felt their cheers wash over her like a tide. But behind the joy, she knew her task was only beginning. Strength was not only to be proven in a trial, it had to be carried forward into leadership, into action, into the lives of her people. That night, when the feast ended and the halls grew quiet, she walked to the balcony where the human stood, looking out at the city lights. He leaned against the stone railing, his figure calm as always. "They cheer for you," he said softly without turning. "But soon, they will look to you for more than survival. They will ask for guidance, for justice, for hope." She stepped beside him. "And I will give it, because now I know I can." Her voice carried no doubt, and that confidence made him smile. The days that followed were filled with change. The princess began to walk among the people, not in carriages surrounded by guards, but on her own 2 feet. She went to the markets where merchants sold their wares and listened to their struggles. She visited the schools, speaking to children who once whispered about the weak princess. Now they looked at her with wide eyes, calling her a hero. When she stood before soldiers in training, she did not command from a high platform. Instead, she joined their drills, lifting weapons, running across the yard, sweating as they did. The soldiers stared in awe. She was not a ruler hidden behind walls. She was one of them. The human often walked with her, though he stayed in the background, content to let her lead. To the people, he became a quiet figure of legend, the strange outsider whose resilience had changed their air. Some nobles still sneered at him, but none dared to challenge openly now. The king himself had declared the bond between their kind and humans sacred. One evening, the princess was called before the council once more. The same nobles who had doubted her now bowed lower than ever. Yet she could see the struggle in their eyes. They were not ready to accept the truth completely. She addressed them firmly. "I know you doubted me. I know you believed I would never return. But doubt has no place in the future of this empire. We cannot cling to pride that blinds us. We must learn, adapt, and rise. That is the only way forward." One noble dared to raise his head. "You speak like a human, princess." She met his gaze calmly. Then perhaps that is why I stand before you alive. Perhaps it is time we stop thinking of humans as weak and start seeing them as allies. The words struck like thunder in the chamber. Some nobles bristled, but others lowered their heads, unable to deny what they had witnessed. The alien king, though old and weary, felt hope in his heart again. His daughter had not only survived, she had become the leader he always wished her to be. One night, as they walked through the palace gardens together, he placed his hand on her shoulder. "You are ready," he said quietly. She looked at him with surprise. "Ready for what?" "For the throne. For the burden I have carried for too long. The people love you. They trust you. And I could not have asked for more." Her heart tightened, but she did not argue. She understood. Her father had fought his battles. Now it was her turn. The ceremony came weeks later, the grand square of the capital filled with citizens from every corner of the empire. The great banners of the royal house waved high above. The nobles stood in silence, the soldiers in rows of armor, the council lined along the steps of the palace. The alien king rose before them, his voice strong despite his age. "My people, today you witness the dawn of a new legacy. My daughter, once frail, once doubted, stands stronger than any could deny. She has faced the trials of endurance. She has faced your doubt. She has returned not only alive, but as the heir we need. I pass the future of this empire into her hands." The crowd roared with thunderous cheers. The princess stepped forward, her eyes sweeping over the faces of her people. She raised her hand, and the noise fell silent. "I stand before you, not as the weak child you once pitied, but as your future, queen. I have learned what strength means, not in silks, not in jewels, not in comfort, but in struggle. It was a human who taught me this. And because of that, I say to you, humanity is not our weakness. It is our strength. Their resilience is now our legacy. Together we will rise higher than ever before." The people erupted again, chanting her name, chanting her words. That night, as the city celebrated, the princess sat once more with the human on the quiet balcony. The sky above was filled with stars, bright and endless. She turned to him, her voice soft. "You gave me more than life. You gave me the will to live." He shook his head. "You always had it. You just needed someone to remind you." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "Then let me remind others. Let me carry this legacy to every corner of the empire." He looked at her for a long moment, pride in his gaze. "You already have." Years later, songs would be sung of that time. They would tell of a princess who was given to a human when all hope was lost. They would tell of how she returned, stronger than ever, carrying with her the resilience of an entire species. They would tell of a human who asked for no reward, no crown, no glory, but gave a legacy that shaped a future. And they would tell of the day when two worlds became one, bound not by conquest or fear, but by the simple strength of endurance. For, in the end, it was not the size of armies, nor the wealth of kingdoms, nor the power of bloodlines that defined the empire's future. It was the will to rise after falling, the courage to keep walking through hardship, and the belief that strength is born in struggle. That was the human legacy, and it lived on forever in the heart of a queen.